report by Sweep South, an online domestic worker booking platform, at least 15,000 jobs have been lost in the sector this year. This as households cut costs. Paladi Satusa now joins us from our Cape Town studio with more on this. Paladi, thousands of jobs have been lost in the first quarter. Why?
So, Shahan, unfortunately, it comes down to the fact that people are cutting out what they deem as luxuries in their lives or things that they don't absolutely need in their lives. So they are cutting back by retrenching domestic workers by large numbers, as you've just mentioned. So we've seen in the first quarter those 15,000 jobs lost in an industry that only employs about 1 million people as domestic workers. So it is quite a big blow. And those people who have suffered these losses are going to have to find alternative means of work quite quickly.
So domestic workers themselves are under immense pressure, financial pressure specifically. What is the new data showing when it comes to this survey?
So it's very interesting, the survey results, Shahan. So they surveyed about 1,300 domestic workers across the country. So people who are on the Sweep South app and people who aren't, people who work at guest houses, people who work at big office blocks, so quite a representative sample. And what these ladies are all saying is that even though a lot of them are making a minimum wage of just under 2,700 Rand, it's not a living wage. So they are still struggling just to get by. A lot of the biggest chunk of the cost goes towards transport, school fees and rent, and just those three alone is already puts them at about 3,500 Rand. So a lot of them are already dealing with a negative balance by the end of the month and have to find maybe alternative work or pick up extra hours just to make up that gap. And unfortunately, others have to turn to things like debt, looking to loans to make up that gap.
Yeah, now many of them are managing to make the minimum wage prescribed by law, but it really doesn't seem to be a living wage, doesn't it?
Definitely, and that's one of the things that was mentioned to us by Aisha Pandor from Sweep South. She was mentioning that while the minimum wage is something that employers must aim for, it's the basic base level thing, it shouldn't be a target. It should be something that sets a guideline, but you should be aiming to pay whoever works for you a little bit more. And if you can't afford to pay them a little bit more, maybe do less days in their weekly schedule or less hours, so that they can pick up a bit of work elsewhere to make up the money they so desperately need.
So South Africa has a sexual determination, which deals with domestic workers in particular. So it's a carve-out of the law that deals with domestic workers specifically. And it sets a minimum wage at 2,700 Rand per month, which I think is incredible also when you consider the expenses and the number of dependents that many domestic workers have. So on average, 3 dependents in addition to themselves, and having to cater for that many people in many cases as a primary breadwinner.
And lastly, there seems to be very little future security. Tell us more about that.
So, Shahan, what also came out in their survey is that a lot of domestic workers aren't registered under UIF, even though it is a basic requirement now. A lot of employees not fulfilling that. A lot of them aren't on a pension fund, don't have the capacity to actually save. So they reach the end of their working life with nothing to look forward to, which is why you see a lot of older domestic workers working well into their 70s and 80s, struggling to work just because they actually have to do it for their survival. So Sweep South, for instance, has introduced mechanisms for people who work on their platform to make sure that they are saving, that they do have a life or disability insurance. So they are doing those small things to create awareness and make sure that the people that work with them are covered in some way.